Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was interesting to see the Premier's desperate move yesterday in the media late in the day to try and blame someone else for increasing the HST to 15% from 13%. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, as mentioned earlier in the mandate letter that the Premier sent out to all his ministers, he said, take responsibilities for what you do. You know, Mr. Speaker, you'll recall, and I'm sure many people on the other side will recall, that there was an act called the Taxpayers Protection Act, and this government repealed it. They repealed it, a piece of legislation that would have given the Premier a much greater hand in moving forward with the HST increase, instead of blaming someone else. So I wonder if the Premier thinks or would comment on the fact that does he think he would have a much stronger social license to increase the HST if he had gone forward with a referendum suggested by the Taxpayer Protection Act?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is alluding to comments that I made to the media. I made comments based on a question where the media asked how can the HST still be raised if there are, in the opinion of the opposition, still a need to debate it. So I pointed out that it passed a while ago, Mr. Speaker. And I pointed out that the structure in which the HST would be raised is actually based on an agreement that the former Minister of Finance, the member from Quispamsis, signed. The agreement called Sitka, that includes the flexibility for provinces to change the HST rate, was signed by the former Finance Minister and member for Quispamsis on July 20th, 2011. So the procedure in which we went about raising the HST to protect healthcare and education is based on the agreement that the member from Quispamsis signed, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, again, we see the Premier in a desperate situation trying to blame the former administration for actions that they have taken here in the legislature, here in the House. And Mr. Speaker, the other safety net that was in place was the Taxpayer Protection Act, that a referendum would have been held before we moved forward here in the province of New Brunswick for any increase in the HST. But again, you know, the Premier seems to think he has the social license. He can define social license when he's reaching into the pockets of the taxpayers, taking $300 million out of their pockets, but he doesn't seem to have a social license when it comes to developing natural resources in the province and creating wealth. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, his legislation is stuck. His new rules are stuck here in the House. They failed democracy. So I wonder if the Premier could tell us, is the increase to 15% tomorrow in the HST legal? Is illegal since Bill 31 has not passed here in the House?
The Honourable Premier.
No.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
So it's not legal. So the Premier is going to continue to break the law tomorrow and start taking money from the taxpayers. Will the Premier release the legal opinion that he has that allows him to go forward with an increase in the HST while breaking the law because Bill 31 has not passed here in the House?
The Honourable Premier.
And, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is asking questions based on a structure and procedure that was signed and agreed upon by the member from Quispamsis. The member from Quispamsis can pretend that he doesn't remember what happened in July of 2011, Mr. Speaker. I can understand why. He wants to forget everything that happened in the mandate in which he was the Minister of Finance. I get that, Mr. Speaker. But the procedure in which we followed to be able to raise the HST to protect healthcare and education in this province and to be able to have the funds that we need to get our financial situation under control, all the while investing in things that will help grow the economy, Mr. Speaker. Well, we did that based on the procedure that was set out by the member opposite. So I, again, would suggest that the opposition should finally look at themselves and say that they have actually created this situation. We are trying to get our finances in order because we lost 4 years when they were in government with a stagnant economy, with bad finances, and we're going to do the right things the right way and invest in the priorities of New Brunswick.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it is very rich that the Premier is standing here today blaming us for increasing the HST to 15% when it's legislation that he has now put on the floor here in this sitting in the legislature. It's stuck. He can't get it through. And now he's just admitted that the increase in the HST is going to be illegal tomorrow. So, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Premier could clear this up quite quickly, because there are people that are going to start pay an increased HST. There's thousands of cash registered reprogrammed to take into effect coming July 1st, and the Premier has just admitted that it's not legal to collect that money. So can he release the legal opinion that says it will allow him to collect that money from the people in the province of New Brunswick? Because let's make it right here, Mr. Speaker, and let's fully understand what has transpired here, because the Premier can't get his legislation through the legislature because he only worked 4 days in the last 11 weeks.
The Honourable Premier.
First off, Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite used the word legal or illegal, and if I misunderstood, then I apologize. Again, Bill 31 does not have anything to do with raising the HST from 13 to 15%. So if the members opposite's motions, in which they took hours of the legislature, are based on that misunderstanding, then really New Brunswickers aren't very well served by the opposition. You would think that they would be briefed, you would think that they would do the work, read the legislation, that they would talk to the member opposite from Quispam-Cis so that they would explain the procedure, Mr. Speaker. Bill 31 has nothing to do with it. It has been passed for months now, or at least for several weeks, Mr. Speaker, that the HST will be increased by 13% to 15% tomorrow. And we did this, Mr. Speaker, to get our finances in order, all the while protecting education and health care, making record investments in education, in fact, and improving health care outcomes, all the while investing in things that will help grow our economy. That's why we made this tough decision, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we'd argue that it's the people in the province of New Brunswick that are not well served by this government, because they did have an opportunity to not increase the HST. They had the opportunity to reduce their expenditures. They had the opportunity to go to the people in the province of New Brunswick, have a referendum, and get a social license on whether or not to take that substantial $1 million, $300 million out of the pockets of the province of New Brunswick. So, Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Premier can release the legal opinion that allows it. Maybe it's coming from Ottawa. I know he takes his direction from Ottawa when it comes to the judiciary here in the province of New Brunswick, but didn't realize that he was turning to Ottawa to trump our tax legislation here in the province. But can you release the legal opinion that says it will be illegal to go forward with the HST increase tomorrow, regardless of any bills not passing here in the House of the Common People?
The Honourable Premier.
It's too bad the member opposite waited till the last day to actually ask questions about the HST instead of focusing on Bill 21. The agreement, Sitka, that the member opposite from Quispam-Cis signed in July 20, 2011, makes it that we had the flexibility to do this, making sure that we follow the procedures, of course. So it's with the Excise Tax Act, and here's what happens, here's the process. The HST rate is set in regulations under the Federal Excise Tax Act. To increase the HST, certain requirements needed to be met, and we met those, Mr. Speaker. We provided 120 days advance notice to the federal government. We publicly announced the HST increase at least 60 days prior to the effective date. The budget was tabled in February, debated since February, and the Appropriations Act was subsequently introduced and passed. Transitional rules were posted with advance notice. The regulatory amendments required to implement the HST increase in New Brunswick, effective July 1st, 2016, received Governor and Council approval on June 3rd, 2016. This means the rate will be increased, and it will be so by the procedure set out in law.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
So you have been doing a lot of work to increase the HST. And you have taken actions that will increase the HST.
Excuse me, member, I remind you that you're to address the chair.
So it's very clear that this government is fully the ones to blame and take credit for raising the HST here in the province of New Brunswick. An issue that has been called a job killer, an issue that has been called the lazy way out, an issue that will drive the economy underground. So I wonder if the Premier won't release the legal opinion that says that. I wondered if his chief economist, David Campbell, has written a piece on how this will affect the economy, an increase of 2% or 2 points on the HST. I wonder if he has addressed the job loss. I wonder if he has addressed the economic slowdown that this will cause. And can the Premier release any report written by The Economist or anyone else in the department that will show how this will affect the economy of the province of New Brunswick?
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, je passe à travers en grand détail exactement qu'est-ce qui avait besoin d'être fait et qu'est-ce que nous avons fait pour faire en sorte que nous allons faire l'augmentation demain. Monsieur le Président, c'est important de noter pourquoi c'est en train d'arriver ceci. Lorsque nous avons formé le gouvernement, nous avions une situation financière très précaire qui a été laissée par le gouvernement précédent. Nous avons travaillé avec les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick de façon très exhaustive, de façon inclusive et de façon donc on écoutait les suggestions et bien sûr leurs idées. Monsieur le Président, on a passé 1 an et demi à aller au travers de la province pour écouter les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick. Ils nous ont dit très clair qu'il fallait redresser nos finances publiques, mais il fallait le faire de façon donc on investissait même davantage en éducation, que nous étions en train d'améliorer notre système de soins de santé et que nous priorisons bien sûr l'économie. Alors justement, Monsieur le Président, c'est ça que nous avons fait avec les décisions que nous avons prises avec les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick et je peux vous dire que je suis très fier que nous avons pris ces décisions. Ça va aider l'économie et aider la qualité de vie des gens du Nouveau-Brunswick.
Leader of the official opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, I call on the Premier to release any report that shows that an HST increase will increase the economy in the province of New Brunswick. Whether it was written by David Campbell or anyone else in his department. Poor David Campbell has been writing a lot of reports lately and they haven't seen the light of day. I know the Premier's been sitting on a draft report that would show how to possibly increase the economy and it hasn't been released by the government at all. So I wonder if I could ask the new Minister responsible for economic development if she has read any reports written by David Campbell or anyone else within the government that shows the effect of an increase in HST and how that will have effect on jobs, on the economy, and the effects that an increase will have on the economy.
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, nous avons pris les décisions difficiles avec les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick, mais nous l'avons fait de façon, donc on priorise l'éducation, la santé et l'économie. Et Monsieur le Président, on ne peut pas juste s'asseoir puis faire à croire que nous n'avions pas des défis, et encore des défis financiers. C'est ça que le gouvernement précédent a fait, et ça ne sert pas à personne. En effet, Monsieur le Président, avoir des finances qui ne sont pas en santé comme province, c'est un gros défi pour notre économie. Et de plus, ça allait continuer, si nous ne faisions pas les décisions que nous avons prises, ça va continuer de nous arrêter de prendre les fonds pour être capable d'investir dans des affaires qui vont aider l'économie stratégiquement. Alors, comme on sait tout bien, les paiements pour nos intérêts sur notre dette, et plus que ce qu'on a investi dans l'éducation postsecondaire comme gouvernement, en raison de la situation précaire que le gouvernement précédent nous a laissée. Alors, si on continue à laisser ça être le cas, Monsieur le Président, ça nous arrête d'investir dans les choses qui vont faire en sorte que nous ayons une économie forte ici, dans la province du Nouveau-Brunswick.
Leader of the official opposition. Member for Moncton Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Going back to the nursing homes in Miramichi, this 240-bed warehouse, for lack of a better word. On June 13th, the Glen government, that's exactly what it is. You know what? It's exactly what it is. It's a 240-bed warehouse, not a nursing home facility. They absolutely need care, but they're not getting it from this. Going back to the Minister for Seniors and Long-Term Care, and the quote from June 13th, our experts have performed an analysis of all the pros and cons of this construction, and this is the best value and most efficient use of our province's resources while ensuring we meet the needs of our seniors. And once again, I'm asking if the Minister will table the reports from those experts so that the House can read them for themselves, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Premier.
I'm certainly going to let the minister answer, but I just can't believe the words that I heard, and I can't wait for the Miramichi leader to print what the member opposite just said about the nursing home. I would suggest the member of the opposition that's from Miramichi talk to his colleague and explain how crucial this is for the quality of life for the people of Miramichi. How every time I went to Miramichi over the last few years, Mr. Speaker, they talked to me about how important it was to the quality of life to the seniors on the Miramichi that we fixed a problem in which the opposition never had the chance or never had the opportunity or never had the willingness to do. Mr. Speaker, the Miramichi deserves better, the people of New Brunswick deserve better, and I cannot believe the member opposite would get up and talk the way he just did about a building, about an investment that's going to help the quality of life of so many seniors within the Miramichi and even beyond, and the policy in which we're making to ensure we have the infrastructure we need to help seniors and their quality of life throughout the province, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Moncton Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know and we remember the seniors asset grab and how wonderfully this government thinks of seniors and how wonderfully they've treated them. Yes. We're absolutely looking for help for the seniors and for the need of new complexes in the province and the need of care for our seniors. But we're looking for the experts that have recommended a 240-bed warehouse. And I'll say that again for the Miramichi leader. This is a warehouse. It is not the type of facility that the modern day looks at. It is not what is needed up there. We want to know what experts have said that we should be taking a step back in time and building a residence of this type that is not what modern day experts have concluded. The villages that they're looking at now are totally different than what is being proposed. We want the best for the people in the Miramichi. We want the best for the people in the Miramichi and the best for the people of New Brunswick. We want it.
Recognize the Minister of Seniors and...
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I was only hoping that the member opposite would clarify his thoughts. I thought it was a slip of the tongue, but obviously it's not. And I can give him a little bit of a history lesson on the nursing home situation in Miramichi, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it was the exact government that's sitting across from me today that canceled the new nursing home in Miramichi, and all they did was put some money into an old nursing home that had no hot water for residents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's unbelievable.
Members?
So you know what, Mr. Speaker? When he talks about warehousing, maybe that's the attitude of the opposition. Maybe that's, Mr. Speaker, what they want. They want to do that. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we care about our seniors, and we're going to make sure that Miramichi has a state-of-the-art 240-bed nursing home. Guaranteed.
Order. Member for Moncton Northwest.
Nothing but love, Mr. Speaker. Really. But you know what? I want to see the care for the Miramichi. I want to see the care for seniors right around the province. But I'm not seeing it from a 240-bed institution. I want this government to say, yes, we care about it, so yes, we're going to do it the right way. I want to know who the experts are that have recommended this. I want to know who the experts are that are saying, yes, we should go back in time and do it the way they did it probably about 200 years ago now. And I'll read you an article when this comes up in the House at a later date. But you know what? This is the way it was done a couple of centuries ago. It's not the way it's done now. I want to know the experts that they've quoted. That's what I've asked them for, to table the information. Who are the experts that they've quoted as saying that a 240-bed institution is the right place to put somebody, is the right place to help the people of the Miramichi? No. Her Majesty's loyal opposition wants to help the members of the Miramichi, wants to help the citizens up there, and wants the right thing to be done for them. We want it done.
Time, member. The Honourable Minister of Seniors and Long-Term Care.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas there's no question, I'm just going to continue to talk about the 240-bed nursing home that is going to be built in the Miramichi. And Mr. Speaker, actually, if the member opposite would have done his homework, he would know that the RFQ has been put out. If the RFQ has been put out yesterday, so we're going to see how this plays out, Mr. Speaker. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? The 240-bed nursing home will have 240 beds, and we're not sure how that's going to look when it's done, because we are going to make sure that we have what is best for the residents. And Mr. Speaker, you know, when you talk about seniors being warehoused, I'll tell you one thing, Mr. Speaker. I've had the opportunity to speak with many men and women that look after our seniors in these nursing homes, and I don't think they're getting warehouse delivery from these people. So that's just disrespectful, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to make sure that the resident in the new nursing home in
Member for Moncton Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, Tuesday I could hardly believe my ears when I heard the Premier suggest that rural roads are not important enough to be brought up in question period. Nothing that comes out of the Premier's mouth surprises us anymore. If he thinks rural roads are so unimportant, I'd like to ask him to tell us what he feels is important about rural New Brunswick, where half of our population just happens to live, work, and raise their families. As Minister responsible for rural affairs, what has he done to improve the lives of the 375,000 people who live in rural New Brunswick?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member opposite for the question, and I think she's referring to a comment from the other member from the other side of Fredericton North, and I'd like to address that. I know the opposition likes to play politics with many things instead of sitting down and have a serious discussion. In regards to the Portobello Road and the logging operation, Mr. Speaker, that the member opposite is referring to in the question that came to the Premier yesterday, I can assure you that I was on site at the Portobello Road on McCoy Street, and I know the member from Fredericton who indicated she had photos and it's her riding. Well, I drove all the way from Miramichi on 2 separate occasions to visit that site. So to say that we don't care about rural New Brunswick and rural roads, it would be completely so far from the truth that it's not funny, Mr. Speaker. Just like I spent time in that member's riding, she was able to take pictures and try to make some accusations that were not accurate. I went on the ground and I went and looked for myself and I got the facts.
Member for Moncton Southwest.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Premier can't answer his own question, but he can answer everybody else's. In the Cabinet shuffle, the Premier shuffled himself right out of the Jobs Board, and who could blame him? But I don't understand why he didn't also step down as Minister of Rural Affairs. He has had every bit as bad at that file as he has been at Jobs, and was a disaster at Jobs. The numbers tell us that. It's mathematics. The Premier must have studied mathematics. He sure knows how to subtract, and subtraction is what's been happening in rural New Brunswick. That's all that's been happening there. The Gallant government keeps taking away and taking away. It has to stop. Can the Premier tell us what actions, if any, he will be taking to promote rural New Brunswick rather than tearing it down?
The Honourable Premier.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais de discuter un peu des indicateurs économiques. L'économie canadienne passe à travers des temps difficiles. Je pense que tous les Néo-Brunswickois et Néo-Brunswickoises réalisent ça. Monsieur le Président, je suis quand même ravi de voir que les entreprises, les entrepreneurs et les gens du Nouveau-Brunswick sont en train de travailler très fort pour être capables de faire en sorte que nos indicateurs, nos indicatrices économiques vont dans la bonne direction. Comme exemple, le fait qu'en 2015, notre PIB a augmenté de 1,9 Monsieur le Président, est exceptionnel. Ce n'est pas en termes de croissance des chiffres qui sont énormes, mais relativement parlant, c'est très impressionnant. C'est la croissance qui était la plus importante depuis 2010. C'était la 4e en termes d'importance autour du pays. Et, Monsieur le Président, c'est en raison du travail des entrepreneurs, des entreprises et des gens du Nouveau-Brunswick. Alors, ça, c'est dans les régions urbaines comme rurales. Alors, on devrait être fiers des gens du Nouveau-Brunswick et qu'est-ce qu'ils font pour l'économie.
Member for Moncton Southwest.
You know, Mr. Speaker, we had a motion on the floor not that long ago that would help create economic development in rural New Brunswick, but that motion, I don't think it's seen the light of day. The Premier has a study or a panel going on maybe, or a plan under construction for just about everything under the sun, but where is the study or panel for rural New Brunswick? Is the Premier going to study rural New Brunswick? Does he already have a vision or a plan? It would be good to know if there is a vision or a plan for the long-term future of rural New Brunswick. But for now, for the short term, it would be good to know if the government plans to close one more office or one more school or close one more hospital in rural New Brunswick before the end of their mandate. Can the Premier tell us if there are any more closures coming for rural New Brunswick?
The Honourable Premier.
Close one more hospital. Mr. Speaker, actually, what we've been discussing since this morning, us raising the HST and making other difficult decisions with the people in New Brunswick, was to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have closed no hospitals, and we will not close any hospitals. But you know who did, Mr. Speaker? You know who did? The people sitting on the other side of this legislature, Mr. Speaker. They closed down hospitals. They closed down hospitals in rural New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker. They're the ones that did that. We are the ones that stood up for health care. We are the ones that stood up for education. We are the ones that stood up to make strategic investments in the economy, and we made difficult decisions to do it, Mr. Speaker. We listened to New Brunswickers, and we made the difficult choices, but more importantly, the right choices for the finances of our province, for the education system that we all hold dear, for the healthcare system that we need to continue to invest in, and of course for the things that will help grow the economy so our people can stay here and come back here to New Brunswick.
Leader of the third party.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Health has indicated publicly that he supports the establishment of a private blood business in Moncton. In Ontario, before they were banned, private blood clinics were set up beside payday loan shops and methadone clinics to prey on the most vulnerable, paying $25 per bag of blood, turning the gift of life into a commodity. Will the Minister prevent a for-profit paid blood plasma clinic from setting up shop in New Brunswick to protect vulnerable New Brunswickers and keep our blood system whole?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've talked about this extensively over the last couple of weeks in the media. Mr. Speaker, this is an industry that is heavily regulated by Health Canada. It's not something that is regulated by the provinces. Health Canada regulates this industry. They any company who wants to open a paid plasma clinic has to receive a license from Health Canada, Mr. Speaker. Now, the opponents to this like to talk about Ontario because Ontario doesn't allow it. But they forget to talk about the provinces that do allow it, Mr. Speaker. This is nothing new. This has been around for over 30 years. In the province of Manitoba, there's been a paid plasma clinic for over 30 years. The province of Saskatchewan allows it, and I know for a fact that other provinces are in discussions with the same company that has been looking at possibly establishing something in New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker. No decision has been made. That'll be up to the company, but there's nothing in New Brunswick that prevents it, and it's heavily regulated by Health Canada.
Leader of the third party.
If this for-profit blood business is permitted to open in Moncton, Mr. Speaker, it will undermine our public blood system. This week, the CEO of the Canadian Blood Service confirmed that it will not purchase blood products from this company. Plasma purchased from the veins of vulnerable New Brunswickers will be exported out of the country if the company can get that export permit. You can believe it. By supporting a business that will have be a direct competitor to the publicly funded Canadian Blood Services funded by our province, we will be taking blood product out of the country that could otherwise go to save a Canadian life. Will the Minister introduce legislation in New Brunswick, as they did in Ontario, to help protect Canada's public blood system from private interests?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to give the benefit to the member opposite that maybe he didn't do his research on this file before bringing it up on the floor of the legislature. Because if he did, Mr. Speaker, he would know that Canada cannot fulfill its requirements, its demand for plasma. Therefore, over 70% of the plasma that's used in Canada is bought outside. It's bought from primarily American suppliers, Mr. Speaker, and 70% of that comes from a paid plasma donation in the U.S., Mr. Speaker. So I have a question for the member of the opposition, or the member opposite. If it's okay to pay Americans to collect plasma that's used by Canadians, why isn't it acceptable to pay Canadians for plasma used by Canadians?
Leader of the third party. Order.
The reality is, Mr. Speaker, in 2009, the World Health Organization declared that global blood products should be sourced entirely from voluntary donors by 2020 globally. In Canada, the Creever Inquiry recommended that we establish a national voluntary public blood system, which led to the creation of Canadian Blood Services, and thank goodness it did. Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, and Nova Scotia have all rejected private paid blood collection. Yet this government is considering subsidizing them to set up shop in New Brunswick with payroll rebates. Can you believe it? Will the Minister join his counterparts across the country and across the world and take a stand against private blood companies who wish to operate in our province?
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, once again, there's some information that was just shared on the floor of this House that is not accurate. But, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to understand that Canadians cannot supply enough plasma for the needs of Canadians. So we can't. So we go outside. We go outside now over 70%.
The member for Fredericton West Hamwell will come to order.
Over 70%, Mr. Speaker, comes from outside of Canada and primarily from paid plasma donation centres in the U.S., Mr. Speaker. That is fact. It's also fact that Health Canada regulates this industry heavily and provides licenses. It's also fact that in over 25 years in Canada, there has never been an issue, Mr. Speaker. So, yes, we talk about the Creever inquiry that was probably, close to 30 years ago, Mr. Speaker. Technologies have evolved. Methods have evolved. There has not been an incident in Canada in over 25 years. I'm not saying that. Health Canada says that on their website, Mr. Speaker.
Time for question period has